minutes, huh? Oh, hey. All right, folks, well, look, thank you very much for coming along for a pre-budget announcement in relation to the money the government is taking and putting into school attendance. Right across our government, we firmly believe that the number one determinant of what will make New Zealand a success in 10, 20, 50 years' time is how many children show up at school today. If we don't have children at school, they're not going to learn. It may be hard to learn when you're at school. I know I certainly discovered that in a few subjects. However, if you're not at school, it's not just hard, it's impossible. And that transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next, equipping the next generation of young Kiwis to navigate the 21st century is one of the most, if not the most important things that we do as a country and as a government. That's why we're increasing expenditure on attendance services by $140 million over the next 4 years. That means that we will be increasing by roughly 50% the amount of money that goes into the attendance service, and it also comes with a serious overhaul of the quality we get for that money, because, as I'll be the first to say, spending money in and of itself is not a solution to any problem. Keeping people accountable for outcomes, in this case higher attendance, is vital. And that's why we're also investing in much better case management systems, much better data. So not only do we know how much we're spending on attendance services, but we can show whether or not we're getting results. The country will be divided into approximately 80 regions, each of which will have a single attendance service contracted. And in the case of schools with particularly poor attendance or large challenges, there will be additional funding for in-house full-time equivalents to help with their challenge. This has been quite a journey over the last year, getting to grips with why our attendance service doesn't work and how it could work. I've held hui or roundtables with people up and down New Zealand who actually work on the front line, youth aid police officers, attendance officers working within schools, principals, deputy principals and deans, people from the social services who actually go and knock on the door, go into students' homes and find out why they're not attending and then get them to attend. I've come across some real heroes. One of mine I call Philippa from Freiburg. Philippa is on the staff there, and every time she has a new cohort of third formers or year nines coming into Freiburg, she takes all of the data from the feeder schools, puts it onto one spreadsheet and starts to work out which students, based on her experience, are likely to be a challenge with attendance. And I went back to the Beehive and I said to the people in the Ministry of Education, how is it possible that with all the power and resources of the New Zealand government, Philippa from Freiburg is making better use of data? That's why we're now publishing daily data. We're overhauling the codes for recording attendance, and we are publishing that data in a way that can be used to measure performance of attendance services. This is all in addition to changes rolled out next year, where every school will be required by law to have an attendance management plan based on the learnings from those hui, listening to people like Philippa up and down New Zealand. We're going to call this system STAR. It's currently being trialled in just over a dozen schools term 2 this year. It stands for Stepped Attendance Response Scheme, and it steps out what actions are required from the school, the government, the various agencies such as police and oranga tamariki, and also, and critically, the parent and the student themselves, depending on their level of attendance. If they're over 90%, which is the government's target, then that is all kapai and fantastic. If the students, as it turns out, are starting to decline below 90, at each phase of the STAR, there are different levels of attendance requirement, or different reactions, different responses to those declining attendance levels from each of the actors involved. So we're creating a really joined up solution that has a role for everybody, because ultimately all of us in New Zealand will bear the costs or benefits of school non-attendance or attendance. I just want to finally acknowledge a few people. Ituali, the principal here at Thorndon School, thank you very much for hosting us. Ituali has just started here at Thorndon School, and just from talking to the students I can tell he's a hit, but he's also a very good example of the kind of proactive approach that is required for a principal to get attendance up. His attendance certainly has risen just in the short time that he's been in charge, and I think that is a reflection of a proactive approach, actually talking to the parents about what the students are missing out on if they don't attend, and encouraging the parental attitude towards attendance to improve in his school community. That's a real star right there, Ituali, and we're very lucky to have people like him that are prepared to run schools. At this point I could give you quite a few more anecdotes, but I probably shouldn't. So in that event I might let you guys ask some questions. Look, we've been very clear that penalties are a part of the mix, but they only work for a small portion of people who are a won't rather than a can't. So yes, if you persistently don't send your children to school, you could be fined, and I suspect we'll see some of that towards the back end of this year. However, I don't want to overemphasise penalties. Oftentimes, it's actually just barriers. You know, I've had examples where a student's been playing PlayStation all night. The youth aid police officer actually went around and confiscated it. And I said to this cop, I'm no legal expert, aren't you guys supposed to actually stop theft? And he said, well, actually the parents asked me to do it because they needed to take control of the situation in their own home. I can see the ministry staff nodding along here. Pretty extraordinary stuff, but it's about case by case working through each barrier. Sometimes it will be that a student has fallen behind in their schoolwork and as a result they feel embarrassed about going back to school, so there needs to be a plan to reintegrate them and keep them there. So there is no one particular reason. There's certainly at one end of the scale parents taking their students out of school so that they can get cheaper fares to go to Fiji. At the other end of the scale, there's parents taking kids out of the school so that they can look after their siblings because they don't have a lot of money. So the focus of the attendance services, there's no one big hit. It's about having people that can go out into the community, like the Philippas of the world, like the Joes from Burnside, the heroes that I've met up and down this country who really are making a difference. Yeah, so the way this funding is going to be allocated is based on the attendance challenge they face. So this school, Thorndon, actually doesn't make use of attendance services. They've got a very good principal, their attendance is improving, they've got a community that is relatively focused on education. On the other hand, there are communities where the parental approach to education is maybe not as committed, and that's the area where we're going to have more of this money going in to fund more attendance officers. And what we can actually do with this is nearly double the number of students that we can reach. Now, I'm not going to put a hard number on that because we haven't contracted them all, but at the moment we haven't been putting in enough money to reach the students we need to reach. This funding boost will change that, but it's critical that we don't just throw money at the problem, we also measure the results. Look, the data tells us that areas like Northland have quite a big challenge, some parts of Auckland, East Coast, Tairāwhiti, there's a challenge there, but I wouldn't stereotype areas. You know, you take an area like Southland or Otago, which tend to have some of the highest attendance, there can still be communities there that need help, so we try not to stereotype or put a broad brush over any one community. In my view, a good school leader can actually make the most difference. At the moment we have about 300. The number that we will be contracting will depend on exactly how that goes, but we're basically doing about a 50% increase in the funding here, so you can kind of make a guess from there, but I'm not going to try and sign up to a number today. Yeah. Yeah, so the new case management software is critical. When I came into this job, I sat down with the Ministry of Education and I said, look, how much are we spending on what? And they gave me a big spreadsheet. And I said, okay, which are the best things we're doing and which are the worst things we're doing? And I thought, we'll just stop doing the bad things and do more of the good things, you know. Unfortunately, they said, we don't know which ones are most effective. So being able to have good case management software, track the students, reduce the time looking for them. We're also going to have memorandums of understanding across the different government departments, because when I've gone out to communities where this really works, for example, you know, in East Auckland, I was out at Glen Innes School, and they have a great cop, codename Blocker, Reese Smith. They've got a really good principal, they've got a good attendance officer working within the school, but they also talk to the people at MSD and Kāinga Ora, who sometimes will say, well, actually, that family moved out 2 months ago, which saves them time looking for them. So this whole STAR system of cooperation is really trying to replicate across the country the examples of school communities I've found that are doing this well. Well, we're rolling it out at the start of next year. The trial's on now. Yeah. Look, you know, I was just talking to Etuali, who I rate as a top principal. I've just met him, but I know he's a great principal. And, you know, I asked him, you've been a principal and a teacher for 23 years. What's the biggest thing that you've seen shift in your career? And he said it's the value the wider community places on education. And so, you know, I'm not here to lecture and hector, but just observe the fact that when you talk to people who are expert and devote their life to this business, what they'll tell you is that the biggest thing that's changed, and the reason education attendance has declined in the last decade or more, is the approach of the wider community, including parents. Well, first of all, we get out here and just lay the facts out. You know, under the previous government, there were many scandals of not revealing the attendance data. Now, if the Ministry of Education gives me the data, they say, what do you want to do with this, Minister? I say, I don't know, give it to the public. I mean, they paid for it and they have to live with the consequences of it. So we're totally open and transparent about the data. I can tell you that yesterday in New Zealand, 85.9% of students were at school. I can break that down by region, I can break that down by EQI. We put it out there, we encourage media to really publish this every day if you like. We also are doing public information messaging, so we're putting money into that separate from this. That continues. And what that looks like is, for example, social media campaigns that are locally driven. So you might see a local sports star saying, look, I went to school, it helped me get where I wanted to get. You know, I believe that this is actually I believe that this is something you should do. So, you know, information, data, attendance services, right across the board, we're trying to promote the idea of educational attendance. Yeah. Well, I've tried to encourage the mayors. I thought if I was a mayor going into a local body election, I'd totally pick it up and run with it. But we've got some responses that maybe the people in those communities need a new mayor. I don't know. Beg your pardon?
Any areas in particular?
Oh, look, I don't want to get into local politics today, but look, all I'd say is that, you know, we all own the attendance data. We all own the outcomes of non-attendance. We all have an interest in raising attendance. And so whether you're a mayor, iwi leader, a business owner, you know, there's things you can do. I mean, I would like to say that businesses should not serve students in uniform during school hours. You know, you've got a moral obligation as a part of your community to not to try and make a few extra bucks, you know, selling a bottle of Primo when you know that the child should be learning. Actually tell them, get back to school. We're really going with standardisation. I mean, what we found is, you know, really disproportionate amounts of funding, really massive differences in the quality of attendance service when we sent Aero to evaluate them last year. What we're doing is 80-odd regions, one provider in each, assessing against the data, and each school having an attendance action plan under legislation to implement the STAR. So we are trying to take the things I've learnt from the best communities that I visited and get those good practices to be everywhere practices. I think it's a larger number. I think it might be over 200, but that's because you have a lot of small contracts, and often in one area there'll be multiple contracted. Yeah, so this won't kick in until the start of next year, but we're going to have a much different scenario from what we face now. Because look, the fact is, Aero told us what you're doing is not working. And that gives you two choices: keep doing it and see what happens, or change things. Yep. Yeah, so the attendance services are particular organisations in each region that will have these contracts, but we're also putting money direct to schools so that they can hire people, and that's going to be the schools, about 170 odd, that have real challenges around attendance. I think the most important thing is that where there's greater need, we put greater resource. What we've done in the past hasn't been entirely proportional. So in school for really acute problems, access to an attendance service in your region for every school. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there'll be a new contracting process in place by the start of next year.
The fines, you talked about there are different reasons for why kids may not be attending school. What gives you confidence that you're going to be able to have a nuanced system that's going to be able to take account of that?
Well, in terms of, doing a prosecution's a big deal. Schools don't necessarily want to do it. They want the ministry to assist them. We've asked the schools to tell the ministry if they'd like to take a prosecution, but you actually are going to have to demonstrate and go through court and show that this is not a can't, this is a won't. And in the case of a group of people or a group of parents or a parent perhaps, who's had every opportunity, they've been told school's important, they've had barriers removed, and they've just said, you know what, we don't think school's important. Well, actually, it is important for that child, and at some level, the obligation for that child to get an education is as important, if not more important, than perhaps some other things they'd like to do.
Yes, but how do you know the system's going to be able to factor in the nuance of kids staying at home to look after siblings versus, how are they going to be able to do that?
Well, you wouldn't take a prosecution to court if you knew the defence was going to be, we physically, financially have no other alternative. That would, first of all, be unlikely to succeed legally, but second of all, what problem would it solve? Whereas if you have people who, could but don't, then I think the prosecution can send the right message.
Have you got predictions on how many instances, might end up in court?
We don't. I imagine that it's going to be quite a small thing. As one youth aid police officer said to me, you don't need to we don't prosecute everyone as police, but we prosecute enough people that people are aware that it's an issue. And I think that basic approach is the right one.
Just to clarify, you say that businesses should sell to kids in uniform, blanket, period?
Yeah, I don't think if you're running a business and you're trying to make money out of children that should be at school, I think business does come with some moral obligations. You're part of a community. That's how I do it.
Kids can get out of they get out of school at lunchtime and can go to shops and stuff like that.
Well, I think
seem like a very workable kind of approach.
Well, I do actually trust people to use some common sense. If you happen to be a business owner next to a school and you know that the students are allowed out at lunchtime to come to your business, then you could probably make a judgment call and say that's okay. If it's 2 o'clock and you know that school's in session and you know that they should be at school, then you should also make a judgment call and say that's not okay. So we can, this is a country of, nearly 5 million adults. We can sometimes trust the people to get stuff right. All right. Well, folks, we've got no more questions. I'm really grateful for you coming out. I hope that the B-roll was worthy, and we'll catch you all again. Thank you very much. Thank you.